Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing explodes. A light simply holds still. Longer than it should. And the night never fully returns to normal. Chapter 1. The sky that watched back some nights widen without warning. They don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with spectacle or sound. They simply loosen the edges of the world, as quietly as a door opening where no door was meant to be. Stand just beyond Denver as evening settles in. Not far enough to lose the city entirely. Not close enough to be held by it. The traffic thins. Human noise recedes. The sky resumes its old authority. The air carries a high, lucid bite, unmistakable at this altitude. It brushes the skin with a reminder of distance, of how close the land already is to the upper reaches of the world. Breathing feels deliberate here, as if the body has to remember itself. Along the horizon, the Rocky Mountains gather in shadow. Their masses felt more than seen, a dark accumulation where the day has retreated. They offer no movement, no reaction. They have learned patience over centuries, and they practice it without effort. Above them, the sky opens fully. Not crowded, not busy. An immense, darkened bowl, scattered with faint points of light that feel impossibly remote. As though depth itself has layers the eye can't measure. You pause. You lift your gaze. For a moment, attention narrows until nothing else asks for it. This is where it begins, not with certainty, not with fear, but with suspension. At first, everything behaves. Stars remain anchored. Aircraft trace their expected paths, blinking in compliance with rules long learned. The mind settles into familiarity, grateful for patterns that ask nothing more of it. Then something disrupts the rhythm, a light, fixed where nothing should linger. It does not pulse. It does not drift. It does not perform. It holds. The sky seems to hesitate around it. Habit rushes in to smooth the disruption. Reflection, fatigue, perspective, explanations surface automatically, well-rehearsed and reassuring. The mind stacks them neatly, eager to close the moment. But the longer you watch, the less cooperative those explanations become. The light refuses the logic of aircraft. It ignores the behavior of satellites. It does not dim, nor does it slide behind cloud. It remains. And in that stillness, something subtle shifts, not alarm, not exhilaration, but alertness. A tightening of awareness, the quiet realization that you are witnessing something unclassified by language. This sensation predates explanation. Long before cities rose or maps defined borders, people tilted their heads toward moments like this. The sky was where meaning gathered, where gods were assigned, where fate was projected, where stories took their first breath. Standing area outside Denver. You join that unbroken lineage without intending to. You don't know it yet. But this pause, this precise alignment of attention, is the pulse that drives every account that follows. Because Denver's legends do not begin with debris or declarations. They begin with observation, with someone looking up. Over the last century, people across Colorado have described nights that fracture in this same restrained way. Not dramatic encounters, not cinematic revelations. Just a brief disturbance in an otherwise unremarkable evening. A rancher closing a gate before sleep. An airport worker stepping outside during a late shift. A commuter lingering beside a car, reluctant to re-enter the current of routine. Each carried the quiet assumption that the world obeyed itself. Each felt that assumption loosen. In the late 1800s, newspapers printed curious accounts, airships reported with straight faces and dismissed with laughter in the same column. Objects described carefully, then brushed aside. Readers smirked. Editors moved on. Yet the stories did not vanish. As decades passed, the tone deepened. Wars reordered the planet. Technology accelerated. The sky filled with machines. And still, some things refused alignment. Mid-century reports grew more unsettled. Lights advancing against wind. Forms gliding without sound. Objects appearing where no flight plan existed. Descriptions shifted with each era, dressed in the language of the time. Yet beneath the vocabulary, the experience remained unchanged. A pause. A question. A fleeting sense that observation was not one-sided. Denver emerged as a quiet witness to these moments. Not because it was singular, but because it sat at a convergence altitude. Clear air, military gravity, and proximity to vast, unlit land. Silence still survived here, close enough to the city to be accessible, far enough to feel intact. The landscape encouraged reflection. Plains yield suddenly to mountains. Urban glow dissolves into darkness within minutes. The boundary between familiarity and uncertainty is thin, easily crossed, and people feel that threshold. Over time, individual moments gathered like sediment. No single incident demanded belief. No definitive story claimed authority. Instead, there was accumulation. A sighting here, a rumor there. A recollection shared hesitantly, often prefaced the same way. I don't know what it was, but I know what it wasn't. The weight of that sentence lies in its restraint. It does not insist. It admits confusion. It leaves space. That space makes it difficult to dismiss. Official explanations arrived in cycles. Balloons, tests, misidentifications. Some satisfied. Others rang hollow. When explanations ended in silence, the silence itself took on shape. Silence remembers, especially at night, especially beneath a sky that refuses scale. What distinguishes Denver's stories is not evidence, but endurance. They adapted from print to radio, from radio to television, from television to glowing screens in darkened rooms. Each generation inherited the same unresolved questions. What moved that way? Why did it ignore expectation? Why did it linger in memory long after it vanished? These questions do not rush. They do not demand closure. They settle quietly, content to remain unanswered. That is why these stories belong to night. Not the spectacle, but the stillness. 2 moments when the world slows enough for uncertainty to breathe. The light eventually disappears. It does not streak away. It does not announce departure. It is simply absent, as if the sky inhaled and released it elsewhere. You remain longer than necessary. The mountains hold. The stars resume their familiar order. The night reassembles itself. Yet something has shifted. Not around you, within. Later, the memory will resurface. Perhaps at a headline. Perhaps at a story told by someone else. Perhaps at an unremarkable glance upward that suddenly feels weighted. Recognition will arrive without drama. That feeling again. This is how the story opens. Not with resolution, with an invitation. A reminder that even in an age devoted to explanation, certain experiences resist containment, and as long as people continue to look upward, on calm nights near places like Denver, the sky will continue to meet that gaze. The questions do not descend all at once. They drift in after the light is gone, settling gently where certainty once lived. And there, in that quiet space, the story waits to continue. Chapter 2. When ordinary nights break. Most nights leave no trace. They move through their familiar motions, gather themselves quietly, and slip away without resistance. Meals are cleared. Windows dim. The world contracts into habits that feel dependable, precisely because they repeat themselves. That is why the nights that fracture linger so sharply. They do not announce importance. They arrive disguised as routine, and only later reveal that something essential has shifted. In Denver, many of these stories begin with a gesture so small it barely registers. A step outside to empty the trash, a pause on a porch before driving home, a dog tugging at its leash, unwilling to finish the same nightly circuit. Nothing about the moment suggests it will be remembered. The air may carry an unexpected chill. The city may sound farther away than usual. The sky, unusually clear, stretches wide over rooftops and parking lots and unlit roads. Then something refuses to align. At first, the mind resists acknowledgement. It diverts attention, reaches for distraction, insists on continuity, fatigue, reflection. A trick of angle or distance. The familiar defenses rise automatically, practiced and reassuring, but the pause arrives anyway. A form suspended longer than it should be. A light advancing without obeying direction. A silence settling where sound should exist. These moments are not sought. That distinction matters. The people who experience them are not scanning the heavens in anticipation. They are preoccupied, tired, thinking about tomorrow. And that is what makes the interruption so intrusive. An airport worker finishes a late shift. Denver International never truly sleeps. Engines hum, lights glide, movement persists even after midnight. Over time, the rhythms become internalized. You learn what belongs. Stepping outside for air, the worker lifts their gaze out of habit, tracing flight paths. Without intention, that is when the pattern breaks. Something occupies the sky without movement, not aligned with arrivals, not signaling with sound. Its presence feels wrong, not because it is dramatic, but because it refuses categorization. The worker does not reach for a phone. Instead, they stand still, measuring the sight against years of familiarity. Seconds stretch. The longer it remains, the more the comparison fails. Then it moves. Not smoothly, not predictably, but decisibly, as if departure were chosen rather than forced. When it vanishes, the airport's noise rushes back, almost too loud. The world snaps into place with an edge of dissonance. Later, when the worker tries to describe the moment, language resists, scale collapses, details blur, yet one certainty holds. Nothing they know behaves that way. Elsewhere, a hiker descends from a late trail as the mountains surrender the last of their light. The landscape already carries gravity, a sense of age and watchfulness that quiets thought. Shadows lengthen quickly here. The sky deepens, stopping to drink. The hiker looks up and freezes. A dark form glides across the fading blue, too slow for debris, too intentional for a bird. It alters course without turning, sliding sideways as if direction were optional. No sound follows. The body reacts first. Breath stalls. Muscles lock. Time thins until the moment feels almost weightless. Then the shape dissolves into dusk. On the drive back, the hiker replays the sequence, compulsively adjusting angles, distances, explanations. By the time the city reappears, the memory already feels fragile, as though inspection might erase it. So the story remains unspoken. These encounters occur more often than people admit, not because they are frequent, but because they are solitary. For every video shared, dozens of moments stay confined to memory. A commuter waiting at a red light notices clustered lights hovering above a distant ridge. They remain through the entire signal cycle. When traffic moves and the commuter glances back, the sky has emptied itself. A couple walking their dog watches a bright point divide into two, then three, each drifting independently before collapsing back into one and fading. They look at each other first, confirmation sought before returning their gaze upward. That glance appears again and again. When reality wavers, we reach instinctively for another witness. Sometimes there is no one. In those cases, the experience settles heavier. Without shared confirmation, doubt advances. Memory negotiates with logic. The mind offers compromises. Perhaps it was explainable. Perhaps I missed something. Perhaps I am remembering incorrectly. Yet even as certainty erodes, residue remains. The night feels altered. Silence gains weight. The sky invites longer looks. These moments do not manufacture belief. They plant questions. Questions that lie dormant for years, surfacing unexpectedly in idle conversations, in passing headlines, in unexplained glances upward. Denver's geography sharpens the effect. The city thins quickly into open land. One moment you are surrounded by glow and noise. Minutes later, darkness feels complete. The transition from known to unknown is abrupt here. In open spaces, the sky no longer feels decorative. It presses closer. It participates. That is why so many stories originate in thresholds. Trailheads beyond the last streetlight. Parking lots at the city's edge. Highways threading through emptiness. The nights themselves are calm. That calmness magnifies the disturbance. What follows is rarely fear. More often, it is disorientation layered with fascination. A mild uneas, a sense that something meaningful occurred. even if its meaning refuses articulation. Many people linger afterward, reluctant to re-enter buildings too quickly. They listen to the wind, watch clouds drift, half expecting repetition. It rarely comes unsettling, because ordinary nights are meant to dissolve into one another. When one refuses, it alters the shape of all that follow. Stars appear sharper. Aircraft earn second glances. Silence feels deliberate. This is how Denver's larger narrative forms, not through revelation, but through accumulation, each moment negligible alone. Together, undeniable. People hesitate to use loaded language. The term itself carries too much gravity, too many assumptions. Instead, they choose restraint. I saw something strange. I can't explain it. It didn't behave the way it should. These phrases do not seek attention. They seek release. Release from carrying an unanswered moment alone. When people eventually discover others have experienced similar interruptions, sometimes nearby, sometimes decades apart, recognition arrives quietly. So it wasn't just me. That realization does not accelerate the story. It softens. It allows uncertainty to exist without urgency. Because this narrative is not about threat. It is about interruption. About the way reality occasionally loosens its seams and reminds us that understanding is provisional, functional, but incomplete, and it almost always happens when no one is looking for it. On nights that were meant to be forgettable, on streets, trails, and thresholds where nothing remarkable was scheduled to occur. Those nights never announce what they are doing. They reveal it slowly, through memory, through repetition, through the quiet recognition that some moments refuse to stay contained. Once a night breaks, it never fully returns to ordinary, and the sky remembers who noticed. Chapter 3, The Shape That Shouldn't Be There. Some sights resist urgency. They do not startle or alarm. They arrive without velocity, without noise, without the language of threat. Instead, they insert themselves gently into awareness, like a misplaced thought that refuses correction. In Denver's stories, this is often the moment that lingers longest. Not the vanishing, not the explanation, but the shape itself. It appears where nothing should be assembled. Not light alone, not darkness either, but form, an outline that asserts itself against the sky with quiet confidence, as if it has always belonged there and only now chooses to be noticed. Witnesses struggle to describe it. Language collapses around edges and proportions. The mind reaches for comparison and fails. It is too solid to be illusion, too fluid to be machinery, too deliberate to be accident. And so people hesitate. A commuter pulling onto a highway ramp slows without knowing why. A jogger breaks stride. A pilot fixes their gaze longer than training recommends. The body recognizes the anomaly before the intellect intervenes. What arrests attention is not size or brilliance. It is wrongness, subtle, precise, unmistakable. The shape does not obey expectation. It does not align with wind or momentum. It changes orientation without rotation, gliding as though direction were a suggestion rather than a rule. No exhaust, no sound, no visible mechanism, just presence. In some accounts, it resembles geometry loosened by intention. A triangle that breathes, a disk that refuses symmetry, a form that seems to fold into itself as though space were pliable. In others, it is darker than the sky behind it, a silhouette moving against starlight, its boundaries unnervingly clean. The absence of sound unsettles more than any roar could. Silence amplifies attention. It forces the mind inward, where unease and fascination coexist. A man driving east along an empty stretch of highway notices. The stars vanish one by one. He slows, confused, until he realizes something is passing in front of them. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with steady intent. The sky feels occluded, as if depth itself has been interrupted. It pulls over, steps out, stands beneath it. Later, when asked to describe the encounter, he speaks in fragments. Distance. Scale. The way the air felt heavier. He admits there was no fear, only a pressing awareness that the moment demanded respect. Others report a similar response. Stillness, rather than panic. A kind of reverence that arrives without invitation. The mind does not shout for answers. It goes coy. This is not how imagination behaves. Imagination embellishes, it dramatizes. It fills gaps with spectacle. These shapes do none of that. They remain economical, restrained, purposeful, and that restraint unsettles. Across decades, the details echo. Shapes appear low and slow, hovering where aerodynamics would fail. They drift laterally, pause mid-motion, then accelerate without transition. Witnesses often describe the movement as sliding rather than flying, as if friction has been negotiated away. What follows is always the same internal sequence. First, disbelief. 10. Focus. Then, the realization that the moment will end before understanding arrives. Hands fumble for phones too late. Cameras struggle with low light. By the time documentation begins, the shape has already begun withdrawing. And then it is gone, not vanishing into distance, not collapsing into light, simply absent, as though it stepped out of the frame of reality. Afterward, the sky feels exposed. Too open. Too ordinary. People stand longer than necessary, searching for residual distortion, listening for a sound that never arrives, waiting for the moment to explain itself retroactively. It does not. These shapes resist containment because they do not announce identity. They offer no clues beyond their behavior, and behavior, more than appearance, is what destabilizes certainty. Aircraft follow rules. Natural phenomena follow patterns. These shapes follow neither. Skeptics point to experimental craft, to misperception, to unfamiliar angles and speeds. Sometimes those explanations suffice. Often they do not. What remains is not conviction, but memory. A memory sharpened by how little happened, how understated the encounter was. No flashing lights, no dramatic pursuit, just a quiet intrusion that left reality slightly misaligned. For many witnesses, this becomes a dividing line. Life before the shape. Life after noticing it. Nothing external changes. Jobs continue in routine as persist. But attention alters. The sky acquires depth. Night becomes less decorative. When similar stories surfaced, decades apart, miles away, recognition flickers. That shape, again that movement, that impossible stillness. The consistency unsettles more than contradiction ever could. Because if the details varied wildly, dismissal would be easy. But they do not. They converge around the same restrained choreography. The same refusal to perform. The shape does not demand belief. It simply exists long enough to be remembered, and that memory refuses to settle. It follows people into sleep, into conversation, into moments of unguarded reflection. It resurfaces unexpectedly, carried not by fear, but by a quiet reverence for having witnessed something that declined explanation. Denver's legends do not hinge on spectacle. They hinge on these shapes, on forms that arrive uninvited, behave with unfamiliar discipline, and depart without closure. They do not leave evidence behind. They leave alteration. And once you have seen a shape that should not be there, the sky never returns to being empty again. Chapter 4. The long memory of the land. The land does not react. It absorbs long before lights disturb the night or engines stitched sound into the air. This ground learned how to hold silence without emptiness. Wind carved its patterns patiently. Stone settled into itself. The horizon stretched wide enough to make small movements meaningful. Colorado remembers this version of itself, even now, beneath runways and highways. The land retains an older posture, attentive, unhurried, watchful in ways that resist measurement. This is why the stories do not feel out of place here. Across the plains east of Denver, the earth opens into long, uninterrupted distances. The eye travels freely. Sound thins. Night arrives without obstruction. In such spaces, attention recalibrates. You notice when something interrupts the expected order. The land sharpens perception. A rancher pauses mid-task as dusk gathers. The fence post steady beneath one hand. The cattle have quieted. Wind moves through grass in low, repetitive waves. When a light appears above the horizon, it does not announce itself. It simply joins the scene. At first, The rancher assumes aircraft. This assumption lasts only seconds. The light does not progress. It holds position, low and steady, bright without glare. The rancher waits. Time stretches differently in open country. Without clocks or noise, seconds loosen. The light remains. It drifts sideways, pauses, then reverses direction without arc or acceleration. The rancher does not shout, does not run. Experience has taught patience. Animals are watched. Weather is read. Some things reveal themselves, only if allowed. When the light vanishes, the field returns to its familiar geometry. Grass, fence, sky. Yet something has entered memory. The land witnesses this exchange without comment. Forter West foothills rise unevenly, shouldering into mountains that have outlasted every story told about them. These slopes have carried miners, homesteaders, soldiers, travelers. They have learned the weight of passage. At night, they darken completely. A pair of headlights winds upward along a narrow road. The driver slows, alert to curves and wildlife. Above the tree line, the sky clears abruptly. Stars crowd the dark with ancient insistence. Then the road brightens without explanation. A soft, expanding glow spills across the trees, moving against the slope of the mountain. It carries no heat, casts no shadow. It feels ambient, as though the night itself has been illuminated from behind. The driver stops. The glow ascends soundlessly, cresting the ridge before thinning and dispersing. No source reveals itself. No sound marks its passing. The engine idles. The forest waits. Long after the glow fades, the driver remains seated, hands resting on the wheel, aware of the land's attention. These moments are not rare because of frequency. They are rare because of setting. Urban environments dilute interruption. Light overwhelms subtlety. Noise competes with perception, but in Colorado as open spaces, the land collaborates with the sky. Stillness becomes a lens. This is why so many accounts come from edge-s fields, at the margin of development, roads that dissolve into dirt, foothills where houses thin and night resumes control. The land offers no commentary. It does not amplify. It does not dramatize. It simply allows. And in allowing, it preserves. Stories endure here not because people embellish them, but because the environment resists forgetting. Memory attaches itself to place. A fence line, a turnout, a ridge that catches moonlight at a certain angle. Return years later, and the body responds before the mind does. Here. This was the spot. The land remembers, even when people doubt themselves. Indigenous nations understood this long before modern explanations arrived. For them, sky and ground were not separate domains, but a continuous exchange. Movement above carried meaning below. Silence was not absence, but attention. That understanding lingers, woven into the landscape rather than recorded in archives. Modern witnesses often describe a similar sensation, not fear, but a quiet recognition that something observed them in return. Not personally, not intentionally, simply as part of a shared moment. The land does not judge this perception, it holds it. As decades pass, the terrain changes, development advances. Lights spread outward, yet even as the city expands, pockets of darkness persist, and in those pockets, the same conditions remain. Clear air, wide horizons, a sky that invites patience. The stories accumulate like sediment layer upon layer, compacted by time rather than spectacle. No single account dominates. Together, they form a pressure that resists erasure. The land carries that pressure. It has held heavier things. Battles, migrations, extinctions. Silence is longer than memory, so when something unfamiliar crosses its sky, the land does not recoil. It simply takes note. And when people leave, when they move away, grow older, or choose silence, the places remain. The field where the light hovered, the road where the glow ascended, the ridge where the sky behaved differently. These locations do not advertise themselves. They do not shimmer with importance. They wait. The land's memory is not narrative. It is present, It does not require belief to persist, and as long as the land endures, as long as darkness still gathers beyond the reach of the city, these moments will continue to find a place to rest, quietly, patiently. Chapter 5: Official Silence. Quiet currents. Attention, once drawn, rarely remains private for long. When enough people notice the same disruption, institutions begin to listen, not out of wonder, but obligation. Patterns invite scrutiny. Questions demand classification, and yet, the official record often arrives already incomplete. In Colorado, reports accumulate without cohesion. Sightings surface in local papers, vanish into archives, resurface decades later as footnotes or curiosities. Each account is logged, summarized, reduced. What remains unsaid is often more revealing than what survives. Military presence has long pressed against the region. Bases, test ranges, restricted airspace, lines drawn across maps that encourage trust while discouraging inquiry. This geography fosters explanation even before evidence appears. Experimental aircraft, training exercises, unfamiliar prototypes. These answers soothe by design. Sometimes they fit, often they do not. During the mid-20th century, as skies filled with new machines and anxieties sharpened under the weight of war, reports increased. Objects tracked visually but not on radar. Radar returns without visual confirmation. Pilots describing encounters that resisted standard language. These reports followed procedure. They were documented, forwarded, assessed, and then they stopped moving. Silence does not always indicate dismissal. Sometimes it signals containment. Files were classified. Explanations deferred. Witnesses advised, gently, officially, to reinterpret what they had seen. Fatigue was cited. Equipment, malfunction, atmospheric distortion. The language remained calm, reassuring. Yet the absence of follow-up created its own narrative. In Denver, this quiet became part of the story, not as conspiracy, but as pattern. Official statements arrived quickly when incidents could be resolved, slowly or not at all. When they could not, this unevenness bred restraint rather than outrage. People learned what questions led nowhere. A commercial pilot, grounded after reporting an object that crossed controlled airspace without response, found the matter quietly closed. No reprimand. No explanation. Just an unspoken understanding that the report would not be revisited. The pilot did not insist. Most did not. There was little incentive to press. Careers rely on credibility, and credibility, once questioned, becomes difficult to recover. So many witnesses learned to compartmentalize. The experience was stored privately, spoken only when trust allowed. Silence became a form of self-preservation. That silence flowed outward. Journalists encountered obstacles that felt procedural rather than hostile. Requests denied due to classification. Records lost to time. Interviews declined without explanation. The absence of confrontation kept curiosity subdued. Official silence does not erase experience. It reframes it. Without acknowledgement, moments drift toward doubt. Memory negotiates with authority. People ask themselves whether they misunderstood, exaggerated, misremembered. Yet doubt does not dissolve memory entirely. Instead, it thins it, leaving behind impressions rather than conviction. The way something moved. The way it refused expectation. The way it lingered in thought long after being dismissed on paper. In recent decades, the posture has shifted slightly. Language softened. Acknowledgement edged into statements. Terms like unidentified re-entered official vocabulary. Not confirmation, not denial classification. This subtle change mattered. It signaled a return to observation without immediate explanation, a posture that mirrored the experiences people had been describing all along. Still, disclosure remained partial. Data was shared selectively, context withheld, conclusions avoided. The current remained quiet. In Denver, this restraint resonated with the existing culture of these stories. People were not seeking validation. They were seeking coherence. And coherence does not always require answers. Sometimes It requires honesty about uncertainty. The desert, the plains, the mountains. They had never offered explanations. They simply provided conditions. Official silence echoed that stance. Uncomfortable, but familiar. Over time, a parallel record formed, informal, personal, resistant to erasure. Conversations held late at night, notes scribbled and forgotten. Recollections resurfacing decades later when someone else finally voiced something similar. These stories did not converge into proof. They converged into recognition. I saw that too. I thought I was alone. I never reported it. The quiet around these admissions was intentional. No spectacle. No urgency. Just relief. Relief that the experience did not belong solely to memory. Official channels may never fill the gaps. Documents may remain sealed. Explanations may arrive stripped of context. But the absence of resolution has not diminished the stories. It has refined them. What remains is not accusation, but patience. Not belief, but attention. Denver's narrative lives in that space between acknowledgement and omission, between record and recollection. A story shaped as much by what was not said as by what was. And in the quiet currents beneath official silence, the unanswered moments continue to move. Slowly, persistently. Waiting. Chapter 6. Those who keep looking, some people do not let the moment pass. Not because they seek proof or confrontation, but because attention, once they awaken it, changes its habits. After a certain kind of night, looking up becomes instinct rather than accident. In Denver, these people rarely announce themselves. They are not driven by certainty. They are driven by pattern. A former engineer keeps a notebook beside the back door. Dates, times, weather, nothing interpretive. Just observation. Years pass between entries. When something unusual occurs, the hand moves without hesitation. A teacher steps outside every evening before bed. Not an expectation, but an acknowledgement. A pause offered to the sky as one might offer silence to a familiar room. A group of friends gathers on weekends in the plains east of the city. They bring thermoses, folding chairs. Patience. Conversation drifts. Laughter fades. Looking becomes communal, unforced. These people are not hunting anomalies. They are practicing attentiveness. What unites them is not belief, but restraint. They speak carefully. They avoid grand claims. Their language reflects experience rather than conclusion. I don't know what it was. I only know what I saw. It didn't behave the way I expected. This vocabulary protects the moment from distortion. Technology complicates the act of looking. Cameras in through the screens demand framing. Yet many of those who continue to watch resist documentation. Not out of secrecy, but because recording fractures presence. It turns observation into pursuit. Some have tried. A lens struggles with darkness. Focus hunts. The sky flattens. When the moment ends, the image feels inadequate, almost insulting in its reduction. The memory remains richer. Others document quietly, methodically, without expectation of sharing. Data becomes a form of discipline rather than evidence. Patterns emerge slowly, tentatively. Certain months recur. Certain directions repeat. Certain behaviors echo earlier accounts. These observations do not resolve into answers. They cultivate familiarity. The sky acquires texture. Those who keep looking describe a shift in relationship rather than understanding. Night becomes less decorative. Silence gains complexity. Absence feels deliberate. They also notice how rare it is to speak openly. When stories are shared, they are exchanged cautiously, often late, often in trusted company. There is no urgency to convince. Recognition alone is sufficient. That recognition carries weight. It says, "You did not imagine this alone." Over time, some watchers stop. Life intervenes. Distance grows. The habit softens. But even then, the sky retains its altered status. A glance upward carries history. Others continue into old age. They know the odds. They accept long stretches of nothing. They are not disappointed by uneventful nights. Stillness is part of the practice. On the plains hours pass, with only wind and stars. In the foothills, clouds gather and dissolve. The mountains hold their familiar silence. Then, rarely, something interrupts, not with spectacle, with precision. A light enters, behaves briefly in its unfamiliar way, then leaves. No announcement, no repetition. Those who witness it exchange few words. Description feels unnecessary. They have learned that moments like this resist containment. The value lies in having been present, not in possessing an explanation. This posture stands in contrast to a culture trained to extract meaning quickly, to label, to resolve. But some experiences do not improve under pressure. The people who keep looking understand this instinctively. They do not frame the sky as adversary or puzzle. They treat it as participant. The desert teaches patience. The mountains teach scale. The night teaches restraint. In this way, the watchers become part of the landscape rather than separate from it. Their presence does not alter the story. It allows it to continue. Denver's narrative does not depend on revelation. It depends on continuity. On individuals willing to remain receptive without insistence, to witness without claiming authority. They are not waiting for arrival. They are maintaining attention. And as long as someone, somewhere beyond the city's edge, pauses beneath the open sky, notebook closed, phone dark, breath steady, the story remains alive. Not accelerating, not concluding, just unfolding at its own deliberate pace. Chapter 7. The Weight of Remembering. Time does not erode these moments. It refines them. Years may pass without recurrence, yet the memory does not dull in proportion to distance. Instead, it grows more precise. Not in detail, but in feeling. What remains is not an image, but a pressure, a recognition that resists simplification. People carry this weight quietly. It surfaces unexpectedly, summoned by ordinary triggers. A clear night after rain, a sudden silence on a familiar road, a star that appears too steady, too deliberate. The body responds before thought intervenes. Attention sharpens. Breath slows. The memory steps forward. For many, the difficulty lies not in recalling what happened, but in deciding where to place it. The experience does not integrate effortlessly into daily narratives. It does not offer lessons or conclusions. It simply exists. This ambiguity can be unsettling. Human memory prefers coherence. It seeks sequence and meaning. When an event resists both, it lingers unresolved, occupying mental space without permission. Some attempt to rationalize it away. Years of distance make this easier. Context changes. Knowledge expands. Explanations multiply, and yet certain aspects refuse negotiation. The way the object moved, the absence of sound, the sensation that the sky had briefly become attentive. These details persist with stubborn clarity. Others choose silence, not from doubt, but from reverence. Speaking aloud feels like dilution. The memory is held intact, protected from reinterpretation. In this way, remembering becomes an act of stewardship. Denver's long narrative is shaped by these private acts. The story advances not through retelling, but through retention, through individuals who carry moments intact across decades, allowing them to age without decay. Occasionally, two such memories intersect. A casual conversation drifts into unexpected territory. Someone mentions a night, a light, a pause that felt significant. Another person stills, listening closely. Details align, not perfectly, but unmistakably. What follows is not excitement, but relief. A subtle easing of internal tension. The recognition that the memory does not exist in isolation. This shared acknowledgement often comes late in life, when urgency has softened and certainty is no longer demanded. The stories are exchanged gently, without insistence. Neither person claims understanding. They simply confirm presence. The weight of remembering is not burden alone. It carries quiet privilege to have noticed, to have been awake to interruption. Not everyone is. Most nights dissolve as intended. Attention drifts. The sky remains backdrop, rather than participant. Life proceeds without disruption. But for those who remember, the world retains depth. The night sky becomes layered, not just with stars, but with possibility. Silence gains texture. Absence feels provisional. These people do not live in anticipation. They do not scan every shadow for repetition. They move forward normally, grounded, functional. Yet the memory adjusts orientation. It introduces humility. Certainty loosens. Dismissal becomes harder. Listening deepens. This shift does not announce itself. It expresses quietly, in patience, in restraint, in the refusal to speak beyond experience. Denver's stories endure because of this posture, not because they are dramatic, but because they are carried intact through time. The weight of remembering does not press downward. It anchors. It keeps attention tethered to the present, aware that understanding is partial and that the world exceeds its explanations. As years accumulate, some memories blur, others sharpen unexpectedly, but none fully disappear. They remain suspended, much like the moments themselves, neither advancing nor retreating, content to occupy their place. And when night settles again over the plains and mountains, those who carry these memories feel the familiar alignment, not expectation. Recognition. The sense that the sky is not empty of history, that it is held and continues to hold moments that resist completion, and that remembering them is not an obligation. It is simply part of living attentively beneath a sky that once, briefly, revealed its depth. Chapter 8. What the sky allows. The sky does not insist. It offers. Night after night, it opens itself without promise, vast and unadorned, indifferent to whether it is observed at all. Most of the time, it receives only passing glances, a backdrop to movement, a surface onto which weather and schedules are projected, and that is enough. The sky does not require belief. It does not respond to scrutiny. It does not reward expectation. What it allows is something quieter. Occasionally, under conditions that resist replication, it permits interruption. A deviation so restrained it can be overlooked entirely. A moment that offers itself only to those already present, already attentive. This allowance is brief. It does not repeat on command. It does not escalate. It does not clarify itself afterward. It simply exists long enough to be registered, then withdraws without residue. What remains is not evidence. It is permission. Permission to acknowledge that not all experience arrives with explanation, that not all phenomena submit to categorization, that some moments are meant to be held, not resolved. Denver's stories rest here, not in declarations or conclusions, but in the space where observation meets humility, where the sky is not framed as mystery to be solved, but as presence to be encountered. This distinction matters. When people approach the night with demands, it offers nothing. When they approach it with patience, it occasionally shifts. Not in response, but in alignment. The sky allows interruption only when attention is unforced. A person pauses, not expecting anything. A night opens, not announcing itself. A moment occurs, not seeking interpretation, then it passes. These allowances do not accumulate into revelation. They do not trend toward disclosure. They do not bend toward narrative satisfaction. They remain isolated, linked only by similarity of experience, not by progression. This is why the story does not advance toward an ending it circulates. Each generation encounters the same conditions. Clear air, open land, darkness, deep enough to restore scale. Each brings its own language, its own explanations, its own reluctance. The sky remains unchanged. It does not confirm. It does not deny. It does not remember in ways we can measure. Yet people do. And memory becomes the connective tissue, not between events, but between observers. A quiet inheritance passed without ceremony. Those who have experienced these moments rarely seek repetition. They understand that allowance cannot be requested. You cannot wait for it. You cannot call it. You cannot recreate the conditions deliberately. You can only be present. The desert teaches this. The mountains reinforce it. The plains stretch it into patience. To live near such spaces is to accept that some things occur adjacent to understanding, not within it. Denver exists at this intersection, modern, illuminated, structured, yet always within reach of darkness that resists domestication. That darkness is not empty. It is permissive. And sometimes, when the city's edges dissolve and the land reasserts itself, the sky opens just enough to remind those beneath it that certainty is not the measure of reality. That observation is participation. That attention itself alters the moment, not by causing it, but by completing it. When the sky allows, it does so without announcement. It leaves no marker behind, no proof to carry forward. Only a memory calibrated differently, a sense that the world is not exhausted by explanation, that not everything meaningful arrives loudly, that some truths move quietly, briefly, and leave without explanation, content to be noticed once. And in that allowance, the story continues. Not forward, but outward, across nights, across landscapes, across lives lived attentively, beneath a sky that offers nothing, and occasionally everything. Chapter 9. The story that refuses to end stories usually move toward closure. They gather momentum, offer explanation, arrive at resolution. They reassured by narrowing possibility into shape. This story does the opposite. It widens. Each account adds space rather than certainty. Each memory opens outward, refusing to converge into a single conclusion. The narrative does not climb toward revelation. It spreads across years, across landscapes, across people who never meet. In Denver, this refusal feels appropriate. The city sits where edges blur, where plains release into mountains, where elevation thins the air and expands the sky, where modern systems operate beneath conditions that remain fundamentally indifferent to them. Such a place does not lend itself to endings. Instead, it encourages continuation. Every generation inherits the same night, the same open distances, the same quiet thresholds where interruption feels possible. Technology changes. Language evolves. Explanations multiply. The experiences persist. They are not identical. They do not repeat precisely, yet they rhyme in unmistakable ways. A light that pauses where nothing should pause. A form that moves without accommodation. A silence that presses inward rather than recedes. These elements recur not because of imitation, but because the conditions that allow them remain intact. Clear air, wide horizons, attention The story refuses to end because it is not driven by event, but by posture. As long as people continue to notice without demanding outcome, moments will continue to surface. Not frequently, not reliably, but persistently enough to resist erasure. This persistence unsettles those who seek finality. It frustrates those who want proof. It evades those who demand spectacle. But it suits those who understand that some narratives are meant to remain open. Denver's story belongs to that category. It does not ask for belief. It does not argue for explanation. It does not escalate toward conclusion. It waits. Weighty is not absence of movement. It is a form of readiness, a posture that allows something to occur without insisting upon it. The people who carry these stories understand this instinctively. They do not rush to tell them. They do not repeat them endlessly. They release them carefully when context allows. Sometimes the story is told in full, sometimes only in fragments. Sometimes only in silence, through a pause and an upward glance. This restraint protects the narrative from exhaustion. If the story ended, it would lose its power. An ending would confine it to the past. Instead, it remains available. Tonight, tomorrow, years from now. Somewhere beyond the city's edge, someone will step outside without intention. The air will feel unusually clear. The sky will widen, and something will occur that resists immediate understanding. That person will stand still longer than expected. They will feel the familiar hesitation, the brief recognition that the moment matters, even if its meaning remains out of reach. Later, memory will sharpen. Years later, perhaps the story will be shared, quietly, cautiously. And it will find resonance in someone else's experience. And so the narrative extends again, not by accumulation of facts, by accumulation of attention. The story that refuses to end does so because it does not belong to time in the usual way. It is not linear. It does not progress its circulatus, through places, through nights, through lives lived with just enough patience to notice when the ordinary loosens. Denver remains one such place. Not exceptional, but receptive. As long as the sky opens and the land holds stillness, the story remains unfinished, and that incompleteness is not a flaw. It is the point, because some stories are not meant to be concluded. They are meant to remain suspended, attentive, quietly alive, beneath a sky that continues to allow more than it explains. Chapter 10. Beneath the open question there is no final image to hold on to, no closing vision where everything aligns, where uncertainty dissolves into explanation. The sky does not grant that satisfaction. It never has. Instead, it leaves an opening. Night after night, it stretches above the land with the same restraint it always has, expansive, uninsistent, available. It does not perform. It does not conclude. It simply remains. In Denver, this feels natural. The city exists within a landscape that resists containment. Light gives way to darkness quickly. Structure yields to distance. The familiar thins into something more spacious. Here, questions feel appropriate. They do not demand answers. They rest comfortably in suspension, allowed to exist without urgency. This posture, quiet, receptive, mirrors the experiences that shape the story itself. What matters is not resolution. It is attention. Those who have noticed know this. The experience did not provide clarity. It offered alignment, a brief moment when awareness sharpened and the world felt larger than its explanations. That alignment persists. It expresses itself subtly, in patience, in listening, in the refusal to dismiss too quickly, in the understanding that certainty is often provisional, useful, but incomplete. The sky does not challenge this understanding. It accommodates it. Living beneath an open question changes orientation, not dramatically, not visibly, but persistently. One looks longer, listens deeper, allows silence to remain unfilled. This is not belief. It is humility. Denver's story resolves into this posture. Not an answer, but a stance. Not a conclusion, but a way of standing within uncertainty, without discomfort. The land supports it. The plains extend patience. The mountains reinforce scale. The desert teaches restraint. Together, they form a setting where unresolved experience feels proportionate rather than threatening. The open question does not seek completion. It seeks continuity. As long as nights fall and people step briefly outside themselves, pausing between obligations, between explanations, the story remains available. It will not announce itself. It will not repeat on demand. It will not clarify itself afterward. It will simply occur, briefly, and withdraw. And those who notice will carry that moment forward, not as proof, but as orientation, a reminder that the world exceeds its summaries. That meaning is not always delivered with answers, that some truths exist comfortably without closure. Beneath the open question, the story does not end. It breathes, and as long as the sky remains wide enough to hold uncertainty, and people remain patient enough to notice, that breathing continues, quietly, without insistence, exactly as it always has. Chapter 11. After the looking after attention loosens, life resumes. Morning arrives with its familiar claims. Light reasserts shape. Sound returns with purpose. The sky withdraws into brightness, its depth flattened by clarity and obligation. What happened at night recedes, not erased, but set aside. People go to work. Conversations unfold. The world continues, as if uninterrupted. And yet, something remains altered. Those who have looked, truly looked, carry a subtle adjustment into daylight. It does not announce itself. It expresses quietly, through patience, through a willingness to pause before explanation closes a door too quickly. The memory does not demand rehearsal. It does not intrude constantly. It settles into the background, available when conditions echo the original moment. A long drive beneath open sky, a sudden hush in a crowded place, an unexpected stillness before weather changes. In these moments, the alignment returns, not the event itself, but the awareness it produced. People rarely speak of this part. It lacks drama. It cannot be pointed to or proven, yet it may be the most enduring effect of all. The experience refines perception. Small details gain clarity. Silence becomes informative. Absence feels intentional rather than empty. This refinement does not isolate those who carry it. If anything, it deepens connection. Listening improves. Certainty softens. The impulse to dominate conversation fades. The world feels less like a system to be mastered and more like a presence to be engaged. In Denver, this quality blends seamlessly into the culture of place. The city already lives in negotiation with scale. Weather that arrives without warning, mountains that impose perspective, distances that recalibrate urgency. Those who have looked fit easily here. They do not identify themselves. There is no signal, no shared symbol. Recognition, when it occurs, is intuitive. A pause in conversation, a shared glance upward when night clears unexpectedly. Sometimes nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. The look-in does not create a group. It does not produce doctrine or expectation. It does not bind people together formally. It simply leaves them receptive. This receptivity does not fade with time. It matures. It becomes less about the memory itself and more about what the memory allows: a tolerance for ambiguity, a respect for restraint. The sky taught this, briefly. After the looking, nights continue, as they always have. Most pass without interruption. Stars follow their paths. Aircraft behave as expected. Darkness dissolves into dawn, and that is fine. The absence of repetition does not diminish the original moment. It confirms its nature. Some experiences are singular by design. They arrive once, adjust orientation, and then release. The value lies not in recurrence, but in calibration. Those who have looked do not wait for the sky to offer something again. They do not anticipate or pursue. They live. And occasionally, without warning, they pause, feeling the old alignment surface, and they allow the night to be what it is. Open, unresolved. Sufficient. After the looking, the story does not retreat. It integrates. It becomes part of how the world is met, quietly, attentively, without insistence. And beneath Denver's wide, unhurried sky, that way of meeting the world continues, unannounced, unclaimed. Still available to anyone willing to pause long enough to notice what remains after the looking ends. Chapter 12, What Remains Unsaid. Some things persist best without articulation. They survive not because they are repeated, but because they are left intact, unhandled, unforced, allowed to retain their original shape. Language, for all its reach, can erode certain experiences by overexposure. This is one of them. In Denver's long narrative, what remains unsaid carries as much weight as what has been shared. Stories are offered selectively. Details are soft. Edges are left indistinct, not too obscure. To protect. People learn instinctively when a moment will be received with care and when it will be consumed. They choose accordingly. Silence becomes a form of respect rather than avoidance. This restraint does not signal doubt. It signals discernment. There are nights that do not belong to explanation. They resist being broken down into components, analyzed into submission. They ask instead for acknowledgement without intrusion. Those who have experienced such nights understand this intuitively. They recognize the difference between curiosity that seeks understanding and curiosity that seeks possession. The first listens. The second dissects. What remains unsaid lives comfortably in the space, created by listening. In quiet conversations, fragments surface, not as declarations, but as offerings, a gesture toward the sky. A sentence that trails off. A pause that carries more meaning than detail ever could. I saw something once. It stayed with me. That's all I can say. These phrases are not evasive. They are complete. They allow the experience to exist without compression. Denver's geography encourages this posture. The land does not explain itself. The mountains do not narrate their formation. The plains do not justify their scale. They simply are. The sky follows the same principle. It does not answer questions posed with insistence. It responds, occasionally, to patience. And even then, it offers only enough to adjust perception. Absolutely no more. What remains unsaid becomes a shared understanding among those who have looked. It does not require agreement. It does not demand validation. It exists as a quiet alignment, a sense that some experiences are not diminished by lack of explanation, but preserved by it. As years pass, the unsaid gathers quietly in the margins of memory. It does not seek resolution. It does not age poorly. It remains available, not to everyone, but to those prepared to receive it without force. This is why the story endures without clarity. Because clarity is not its purpose. Presence is, and presence does not require articulation. Beneath Denver's wide night, what remains unsaid continues to hold its place, not as omission, but as integrity, a reminder that not everything meaningful demands translation. Some things ask only to be noticed once, and then left alone. Chapter 13. The quiet continuation. Nothing announces the continuation. There is no signal that the story persists, no marker that distinguishes one night from the next. The sky opens, as it always has, indifferent to narrative, unmarked by what has already occurred. And yet, the conditions remain. Clear air still arrives after storms. Darkness still gathers beyond the last streetlight. The land still holds its shape, patient and receptive. In these conditions, the possibility endures. Not as expectation, as a concession. Somewhere beyond the city's edges, someone pauses briefly, without intention. A habit breaks, a tension lifts, the sky widens. Nothing happens, or something does. The distinction matters less than the posture itself. The continuation does not depend on repetition. It depends on readiness, not readiness to witness something extraordinary, but readiness to be present without demand. This posture does not belong exclusively to those who have experienced interruption before. It remains available to anyone willing to slow enough to notice when the ordinary loosens its hold. Most nights will offer nothing. That is part of the agreement. Still, the act of looking carries value even when the sky remains unchanged. It restores proportion. It reintroduces scale. It reminds the observer that certainty occupies only a small portion of what exists. Denver's landscape supports this awareness. The city recedes quickly. Darkness returns icily. The transition from structure to openness is abrupt and instructive. Here, the sky does not feel decorative. It feels present. The story continues, not because something demands to be seen, but because people continue to look, not out of expectation, but out of relationship. The sky does not reward this looking. It accommodates it. Sometimes, accommodation turns into interruption in a moment. It behaves briefly in its unfamiliar way. Then it withdraws. The continuation absorbs this without urgency. Memory holds it. Silence protects it. Life proceeds. The story does not accumulate toward climax. It layers gently, like sediment laid down over time. Imperceptible, day to day. Undeniable across decades. Each layer is thin, each moment modest. Together, they shape something durable. The quiet continuation resists ownership. No one carries authority over it. No single voice defines it. It belongs to place, to attention, to the open question that remains comfortably unresolved. Denver is not unique in this, but it is well positioned. As long as the land holds stillness and the sky remains wide enough to resist explanation, the continuation remains possible, not inevitable. Possible. And possibility, in this context, is enough. The story does not seek an ending. It seeks presence. And presence, once established, does not need reinforcement. It simply continues quietly, patiently, beneath a sky that remains open to those who notice without insistence. Chapter 14. The lasting quiet. The quiet does not fade. It settles long after the looking has ended. After the story has been carried forward in fragments and silences, something remains that resists erosion. Not memory exactly, and not belief, but a steadiness. A way of meeting the world that has been subtly, permanently adjusted. This quiet is not empty, it holds weight. Those who carry it move through days with an altered sense of proportion. Urgency loosens its grip. Certainty no longer insists on being complete. Silence becomes something to enter rather than fill. The lasting quiet expresses itself gently, in the way conversations pause without discomfort, in the willingness to listen longer than necessary, in the ease with which unanswered questions are allowed to rest. It does not announce origin. It does not demand recognition. It simply endures. Denver's landscape receives this quiet without resistance. The city hums, but it never fully overwhelms. Beyond its lights, darkness reasserts itself quickly, offering a familiar depth. Here, the quiet feels appropriate. It aligns with the land's long memory, with the mountain's refusal to hurry, with the plain's patient reach toward the horizon. The environment does not contradict the posture. It supports it. This is why the story does not resolve. Resolution would break the quiet. An answer would close, something that was never meant to close. It would compress a space that functions best when left open. The lasting quiet protects that openness. People who have experienced interruption do not seek to name it. Naming would sharpen edges that were never meant to be defined. They understand, intuitively, that some experiences retain their value only when allowed to remain broad, indefinite, uncontained. This understanding matures over time. What begins as uncertainty becomes comfort. What once felt destabilizing settles into equilibrium. The sky does not change, but the way it is held does. Night no longer feels like absence. It feels like capacity. A space capable of holding more than what is immediately visible. This awareness does not isolate. It connects, not through shared explanation, but through shared restraint. A glance upward on a clear night. A pause at the edge of the city. A silence allowed to stretch. These gestures carry the quiet forward. The story continues in them, not as narrative, but as orientation. Denver's wide sky remains open to this posture. It does not require participation. It does not punish indifference. It simply remains available. And availability, sustained over time, becomes invitation. Not an invitation to conclude, but to remain. To stand within uncertainty without discomfort. To recognize that some of the most enduring truths are not those we can articulate, but those that quietly alter how we listen, how we wait. The lasting quiet holds all of this. Patient, unresolved, enough. Chapter 15. Where the story rests. Every story chooses its resting place. Not an ending, but unsettling. A point where movement slows and meaning spreads outward rather than forward. This story comes to rest not in certainty, but in awareness. It rests in the pause before interpretation arrives, in the breath held a second longer than necessary, in the glance upward that carries no expectation. Here, beneath Denver's wide and unassertive sky, the story finds its natural ground. Nothing gathers for a final statement. No truth steps forward to claim authority. The landscape offers no punctuation. It simply continues, plains extending eastward, mountains holding their dark outline, the city breathing between them. This is enough. The moments that shaped the story do not seek permanence through repetition. They endure through orientation, through the quiet shift that remains after the night returns to normal. People live their lives within that shift. They make decisions. They love. They lose. They move forward without reference to what they cannot explain. Yet the awareness remains a soft undercurrent, reminding them that the world is larger than its summaries. This awareness does not diminish reality. It deepens it. The sky no longer functions as backdrop alone. It becomes context, a reminder of scale, of restraint, of how little must be understood for meaning to exist. This is where the story rests, not in answers, but in permission. Permission to leave questions open. Permission to let experience remain unclassified. Permission to trust attention more than conclusion. Denver holds this posture well. The city does not demand interpretation from its landscape. It allows distance, darkness, and silence to coexist with motion and light. The land accepts the story without shaping it, and so the story remains available, not as something to be finished, but as something to return to. A night, a pause, a moment when the ordinary loosens its grip. Nothing more is required. Where the story rests, it does so lightly. It does not press. It does not insist on being remembered. It waits patiently, quietly, for the next moment of unforced attention. And when that moment arrives, the story will not begin again. It will simply continue, exactly where it left off. Chapter 16. The Unclaimed Horizon. The horizon does not belong to anyone. It stretches outward without allegiance, receiving light and shadow with equal indifference. Each evening, it gathers the day and releases it slowly, allowing night to settle without ceremony. In Colorado, the horizon feels especially unclaimed. The land offers distance without resistance. The sky accepts it. Together, they create a margin wide enough for uncertainty to breathe. This is where the story ultimately resides, not in events, but in margins. Not in declarations, but in space. The unclaimed horizon does not promise revelation. It does not hint at arrival. It simply remains open. A line that invites attention without demanding interpretation. Those who pause here feel the familiar recalibration. Perspective widens. Urgency thins. Thought loosens its grip just enough to allow presence. Nothing needs to occur. And sometimes, something does. But, even then, the horizon does not react. It does not frame the moment or preserve it. It absorbs. It the way it absorbs everything else. Without preference, without record. This lack of ownership is essential. The moment does not belong to the witness. The witness does not belong to the moment. Both pass through the same open space, briefly aligned. Denver's story ends, if it can be said to end, in this alignment. A city held lightly between plains and mountains. A sky wide enough to resist conclusion. A horizon that remains open regardless of what crosses it. The unclaimed horizon offers no answers. It offers proportion. It reminds those who stand before it that understanding is not a requirement for meaning, and that attention, once given freely, is enough. Here, the story does not conclude. It disperses. Into evenings, into glances upward, into pauses that do not seek justification. The horizon remains patient, receptive, unmarked, and beneath it, the quiet continues, unclaimed and unresolved, exactly as it should. Chapter 17. What was never claimed. Nothing here was ever claimed. Not the sky. Not the moments that passed through it. Not the attention that briefly aligned beneath it. From the beginning, the story resisted ownership. It did not present itself as discovery or conquest. It arrived without invitation and departed without trace, leaving behind only adjustment, a slight shift in how the world was met. That shift was never meant to be collected. Those who experienced interruption did not gain authority from it. They did not inherit responsibility or insight beyond their own awareness. What they received was not knowledge, but proportion. This distinction matters. Knowledge can be traded, challenged, discarded. Proportion endures quietly. It alters orientation without insisting on explanation. Denver's story belongs to proportion, to the sense that the sky exceeds what is required of it, that the land holds more history than it reveals, that attention, when offered without demand, occasionally aligns with something that refuses to be named. Nothing in this narrative was meant to resolve into claim or conclusion. There is no ownership of experience, no hierarchy of witnesses, no authority derived from seeing. What was seen remains unclaimed, not because it lacks importance, but because claiming it would diminish its nature. The sky does not offer itself for possession. It offers itself of presence. This posture dissolves the need for endings. Without claim, there can be no closure. Without closure, the story remains available, not as unfinished business, but as ongoing relationship. Those who have noticed understand this intuitively. They do not revisit the moment seeking validation. They do not shape it into belief. They let it rest. In that resting, the experience retains integrity. It is neither inflated nor dismissed. It exists comfortably beyond language. Denver's wide spaces support this restraint. They do not demand interpretation. They do not impose narrative. They allow events to pass through without insistence. This allowance is rare. In a world structured around extraction and conclusion, the unclaimed stands apart. It resists consumption. It resists resolution. It persists quietly. The story, if it can be called that, remains intact, precisely because it was never claimed. It does not belong to history or myth. It does not belong to belief or skepticism. It does not belong to anyone. It exists lightly, attentively, in the space between looking and knowing. And in that space, it continues, unnowned and unresolved, exactly as it began. With nothing claimed and nothing required. Chapter 18. The Open Distance. Distance is not absence. It is allowance space where movement can occur without friction, where attention can stretch without strain. In Colorado, distance shapes perception as much as any event ever could. The open distance east of Denver dissolves the city quickly. Lights dim. Sound recedes. The land widens until scale reasserts itself. Here, the sky feels closer, not because it descends, but because nothing interferes. This openness does not demand engagement, it permits. Italiano. Standing within such distance, the mind loosens its grip on urgency. Time redistributes itself. The present expands just enough to become inhabitable. Nothing needs to happen. And sometimes, that is when something does. But even then, distance remains unchanged. It does not react. It does not frame the interruption as important or rare. It absorbs it as part of its ongoing availability. This absorption is instructive. It suggests that moments do not need emphasis. To matter, that attention itself carries weight, regardless of outcome. Those who have noticed this understand that the open distance is not a stage. It is a condition that allows interruption without spectacle and continuity without explanation. Denver's narrative unfolds within this condition. The city exists not as center, but as threshold, a place where structure meets openness and neither fully dominates. This balance sustains the story. People move outward into the distance, pause briefly, then return. Life continues. The distance remains. What passes through, it leaves no permanent mark. And yet, those who stand within it sometimes leave altered, not transformed, adjusted. The open distance does not claim responsibility for this adjustment. It simply provides the setting in which it can occur. In this way, distance becomes collaborator rather than backdrop. It shapes how experiences are held, how memories settle, how questions are allowed to remain open. The story does not press forward through distance. It circulates within it, across roads and fields, across nights and seasons. It allows it to persist, light, uninsistent, unresolved, exactly as distance itself persists. Wide, quiet, available. Chapter 19. The sky unanswered. The sky remains, not altered by attention, not diminished by time, not obligated to resolve what it has allowed. It stretches above Denver with the same composure it has always carried, wide, unhurried, indifferent to narrative. Planes pass, weather shifts, stars arrange themselves into familiar distances. The ordinary resumes its patient rhythm, and still, something lingers. Not in the sky itself, but in those who have stood beneath it long enough to feel the question take shape without words. The question does not ask what or why. It asks only for acknowledgement. That acknowledgement does not seek reply. It settles quietly into awareness, becoming part of how the world is met rather than something to be solved. This is the sky, unanswered, not because it withholds, because it exceeds. Denver's story lives comfortably within this excess. It does not strain against it. It does not attempt to extract meaning where meaning resists capture. Instead, it adapts. People continue their lives. They raise families. They build structures. They tell stories that conclude neatly, because most stories must. Yet beneath those conclusions, something open persists. A recognition that not all experience submits to framing. A respect for moments that arrive complete without explanation. The sky teaches this without instruction. It offers scale without commentary, distance without dismissal, presence without insistence. Those who have noticed carry this forward not as memory alone, but as orientation. They move through the world slightly differently, not detached, but less hurried, less certain that certainty is required. They do not look upward constantly, but when they do, the gaze holds longer. This posture does not isolate them from others. It connects them more deeply to place, to time, to the quiet continuity that runs beneath visible change. Denver remains a fitting ground for such a story. The city never fully forgets the land it occupies. Darkness is always nearby. Distance is never theoretical. Here, unanswered questions do not feel unfinished. They feel appropriate. The sky does not promise return. It does not hint at future allowance. It does not signal that something more will come. And yet, the possibility remains, not as expectation, but as condition. As long as nights fall and people pause without agenda, the unanswered will continue to exist, not pressing, not receding. Simply present, this is not mystery seeking resolution. It is reality acknowledging its own depth. And beneath that acknowledgement, the story does not conclude. It rests, open, patient, unanswered, beneath a sky that remains wide enough to hold more than it reveals. Chapter 20. The still available night remains available. Not promised, not summoned, simply present, returning each evening with the same unremarkable patience it has always shown. In Denver, night does not arrive dramatically. It seeps in along the edges of buildings, softens the grid of streets, loosens the city's hold just enough for distance to reassert itself. Beyond the glow, darkness gathers without effort. This availability is easy to overlook. Most nights pass untouched. People move indoors. Curtains close. Screens claim attention. The sky continues without witnesses, unchanged by the absence. And that, too, is part of the arrangement. Availability does not require participation. Yet sometimes, someone steps outside without reason. Not to search, not to confirm, just to pause between moments. The body settles. The breath evens. The night opens as it always has. Nothing happens, or something does. The distinction remains secondary. What matters is that the night was there to receive attention without demanding outcome, that it held space without instruction, that it remained wide enough to allow interruption without insisting upon it. This is the quiet contract. The still available night does not accumulate meaning. It does not grow more likely with repetition. It does not respond to desire. It simply remains accessible to those who enter it. Without expectation, Denver's story rests comfortably within this accessibility. It does not rely on frequency or escalation. It survives through posture, the willingness to pause, to look, to let the sky remain unsolved. As years pass, fewer people remember specific details. Exact shapes blur. Dates fade. What persists is orientation. A comfort with openness, a patience with uncertainty, a respect for experiences that do not offer conclusions. These qualities are carried forward quietly, embedded in how nights are met. The still available night does not belong to those who have looked before. It does not privilege memory. It remains open to anyone, at any time, willing to meet it without insistence. This openness is its power. Not spectacle, not revelation. Availability. And so the night continues to arrive. Wide. Unclaimed, unanswered, still available, exactly as it needs to be beneath a sky that asks nothing, explains nothing, and remains quietly sufficient. Chapter 21. The unfinished calm. Calm does not require completion. It settles most easily, where nothing insists on resolution, where questions are allowed to remain open without pressure, an experience is trusted to be sufficient in itself. In Colorado.com gathers this way, spreading across land that has never hurried to explain itself. After everything that has been noticed, after all the pauses and quiet recognitions, what remains is not anticipation. It is steadiness. The unfinished calm moves through ordinary days. Unnoticed, it appears in the way people linger at thresholds, doorways, porches, the edge of a road before returning to motion. It lives in moments when urgency loosens and the present expands just enough to be felt. Nothing demands attention, and yet attention is available. Those who have encountered interruption do not live differently in visible ways. Their lives continue with the same obligations, the same rhythms. But beneath those rhythms, calm carries a subtle openness, an understanding that certainty is not the measure of reality. This calm does not search the sky. It trusts it on clear nights, when the city's lights soften and distance reasserts itself. The unfinished calm returns. The body recognizes the conditions instinctively. Breath slows, thought quiets. The sky opens. No event follows. And that is enough. The calm remains unfinished because it does not require closure. Completion would diminish its nature. It would replace presence with explanation, exchange patience for conclusion. Denver's story settles here, not suspended in suspense, but held in balance. A balance between knowing and noticing, between explanation and allowance, between silence and attention. The unfinished calm supports this balance effortlessly. It does not push the story forward or pull it back. It simply holds it in place. As long as people continue to live within reach of open land and wide sky, as long as nights remain capable of quiet, this calm remains accessible. It does not need to be cultivated. It waits, and when it is felt, it carries no demand. It asks only that it be allowed to remain unfinished, because some states are not meant to resolve. They are meant to endure, calm, open, and quietly present, beneath a sky that continues to offer more space than answers. Beneath what remains in the end, nothing is concluded. The sky does not gather itself for a final statement. The land does not offer a closing gesture. Night continues to arrive as it always has, without ceremony, without insistence, without explanation. What remains is not an answer. It is a posture. A way of standing within the world that leaves room for what cannot be named. A willingness to pause without agenda. An acceptance that some experiences are complete the moment they occur, needing no further resolution. Denver's story lives in this posture. It does not belong to a moment, or a witness, or a record. It belongs to the space where attention meets openness, where the ordinary loosens just enough to reveal depth. This space is not rare. It is simply overlooked. Anyone can step into it, not by searching, but by allowing, not by demanding, but by noticing. The sky does the rest, or nothing at all. And that is the point. What endures is not mystery, but presence. Not belief, but attentiveness. Not certainty, but proportion. Beneath the wide, unclaimed sky, the story does not end. It settles quietly. Enough